Alright, so I just finished Disney Adults, a book written by AJ Wolf, who runs Disney Food Blog as well as allears.net. All in all, I liked how she tried to cover a very interesting subject. Disney adults, of course, are adults who like to engage in the act of anything related to Disney, whether that means being a fan of the parks, enjoying the movies, and it's something that definitely spans multiple generations. You have people who, from my aspect, would be grandparents, given that the Disney company's been around for roughly 100 years, a little over 100 years now. So interesting how she kind of looked at some of the subcultures of it. I did try to bring in lots of stories from actual Disney adults. I will say that I enjoyed that aspect of it. I thought that was kind of neat. It is interesting when someone talks about how it's a subset that skews female. Specifically, as you have, the Disney princesses was definitely a much larger impact, a much more generational impact on certain things. But then also talk about how, other fandoms don't get as much hate. It's like, well, she brought up like comic books and Star Wars and Star Trek fans. I'm like, no. Apparently, you were never a comic book fan in the 80s and 90s. I got picked on a ton for reading, the X-Men handbook. That stuff's written for kids. So even when I was in middle school, people made fun of you for liking Star Wars, Star Trek, or comic books. It's less that it's mainstream acceptable to be in all those things as opposed to Disney. Not Disney owns Marvel. There are also aspects too, which talks about this is definitely has to do more with if you're part of a other quote unquote marginalized group as well as a Disney fan, then you get online hate from both sides, and it's like, well, yes, that is true. Do I wish she could have broadened out her scope more and got different people involved with some of these discussions? Yes. It definitely does skew towards these people that, respond to my Instagram. I'm like, well, so I took a subsection of a group and then used them as a decent amount of some of the background research for some of the polling that was done. All in all, complex subject, handled about as good as you can from someone who directly profits from the Disney adult aspect. Even went into some other topics that I thought you might try to shy away from, some of that being the political and the lobbying side of things that Disney is engaged in, and how that has in some way also subdivided the fan base. Some of those things are kind of interesting. The story that she had when she talked with somebody who did run Disney, and that was her first time running on her blade because she was an amputee. And some of those stories, I'm like, this is interesting, but you pick incredibly specific individuals and then try to expound upon that, and it's like those aspects are a bit on the flawed side. But again, you're trying to look at a multi-generational, multi-demographic group, and then trying to do that in such a way that it's coherent and concise enough to do within a book format. Of course, I did it through Audible because I want to hear the actual author in their own words say their own words. Yes, those of you who are following some of the book reviews, yes, I did finish doing Karrion Kross's book, and then I followed that up with AJ Wolf's book. Yes, so try being a professional wrestling fan who, I would say I'm a Disney adult. I would say that I'm mostly a Disney parent. My interaction with the Disney company essentially really took off more when I had a child. You try to find decent enough family entertainment so the whole family could enjoy. A lot of it is Disney. A lot of it's also DreamWorks. Not throwing any shade to the Universal properties, but then there's a lot more in the Disney side of things. So, had I not become a parent, chances are my Disney interaction would probably be like, hey, I like the Marvel movies and I'm a Star Wars fan. And Disney happens to own both those properties. So, interesting book if you want to learn more about the subject, or if you want to know, hey, am I a Disney adult? AJ does a really good job. If you followed her on Disney Food Blog on the YouTube channel, you've heard her voice numerous times. And it's just like hearing her read a story to you for several hours.